Hello and welcome. So we have a ton to cover in today's video. We have updated unemployment data and news. We have information on the Main Street lending program. We have some stock market news. And I combed through some of your guys' comments to find questions that I felt needed some in-depth answers. So I'll cover some questions about the stimulus debit cards, the unemployment programs, and the first stimulus payment. So let's get right into it. Starting with unemployment news, more than 3 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits just last week. That raises the total number of claims to just over 42 million workers who have lost their jobs since the beginning of the C-word epidemic. 1.2 million people have also applied for the pandemic unemployment insurance assistance. You know, I was relatively young during the Great Recession, and I don't think I fully understood the magnitude of it while it was happening. I just remember my parents saying, hey, the economy is really bad right now. We can't do this, we can't do that. But I never thought really, much of it. I was basically a kid. But the US has lost, as bad as the Great Recession was, the US has lost twice as many jobs in the last 2 weeks than there were lost in the entire multi-year Great Recession at this point. This absolutely blows me away. From day one, I was saying that the economic effects of the virus would be worse than the actual disease itself. But for some reason, reading that fact just really solidified to me how insane this situation really is. 2 times more than the entire Great Recession. This lack of employment has decreased consumer spending by 13.6% in just April compared to April of last year, which equates to a decrease of $1.89 trillion in spending just in April. $1.8 trillion is 8.8% of the US's entire GDP in 2019. The first quarter of 2020, we saw a drop in GDP of around 5% from last year. And this is a strong indicator that quarter 2 is going to have a much greater drop. I won't be surprised if quarter 2 has a GDP that's 30% lower than it was quarter 2 of last year. A drop that low could actually mean deflation. Despite all these stimulus packages and everything like that, it's still possible to have deflation. There's many factors that can cause deflation, but 3 of the major ones are a decrease in the money supply, the supply of goods being higher than the demand for goods, and a decrease in consumer credit. Right now, we're checking all those boxes. So if the trends continue, we might actually see deflation this year, which is just insane. So moving on from that point, in CARES Act news, the Fed has announced that the Main Street lending program will be up and running within a few days. This program doesn't affect most individuals unless you work at one of these businesses, so I'm going to make this very brief. The Main Street lending program helps mid-sized businesses, meaning businesses with less than 15,000 employees or less than $5 billion in revenue, which sounds pretty darn large to me. How this program is supposed to work is the Fed will identify businesses that were in good financial shape before the C-word epidemic, but are struggling now, and the Fed will then offer to hold their debt with more favorable loans, allowing these mid-sized businesses to have better terms and a better chance at the business surviving. The Fed has pointed out time and time again that they're trying to identify businesses that were in a strong financial footing beforehand. They're just really trying to point out hey, we're not just saving any old business like a business that was running poorly, had poor financials beforehand, isn't likely going to get funding through this program, is basically what they're saying. The program is also being criticized because it doesn't have as rigid guidelines as the Paycheck Protection Program does as far as retaining employees. In the Paycheck Protection Program, you basically have to spend the majority of your loan funds on payroll, and you need to retain employees in order to receive full forgiveness. The stipulations just aren't quite as rigid for these mid-sized businesses, which I believe that they should be, and I believe that criticism is valid. So moving on to your stimulus-related questions. Someone asked, let's see here. Someone asked, can I get the stimulus debit card if I'm on SSDI? So this question is actually pretty interesting because the answer is yes, you may. Originally, it was said over and over that anyone who is a beneficiary of a government program will receive the stimulus in the same place they typically receive their monthly benefits. However, some people eventually started receiving checks in the mail instead of this normal account that they receive their benefits in. So we were like, why did I receive a check? I've been receiving benefits for the last 18 years in this account. And now some people are getting debit cards too, despite the fact that they've never said, hey, you might also get a debit card. So the answer is yes, it is possible that you could receive that debit card instead of a direct deposit. And while we're on the topic of stimulus debit cards, there was a piece of news on this. Some Democratic Party members have been questioning the Treasury's methods on sending out these cards and kind of facilitating the whole debit card program. According to the Treasury, the whole point of these stimulus debit cards was to help speed up the process to get stimulus payments out. Specifically, the goal was to get stimulus payments out to people who either didn't have access to a way to cash a check or access to a bank account, which doesn't exactly make sense because people with bank accounts are receiving these. But because so many people either think that this card is a scam when they receive it, or they're accidentally throwing out the payment thinking that the debit card is just junk mail, the Democratic Party members are thinking that this whole debit card program might actually slow down the entire stimulus process, having the opposite effect of what the debit card program's idea was. So we might see even more changes to the stimulus program in the future if these debit cards just keep causing more and more problems. I mean, really all they need to do is change the envelope or make it more obvious. It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult, but there's just always more and more surprises. So moving on to the next question. Let's see. Alex and Abby asks, I already received my stimulus payment, but my son has not. His status says processing for the last week. What does that mean? So, to be honest, at this point, I wouldn't trust the status as far as when you'll receive anything. I think if it says it's processing, you're going to eventually receive it. But if it says it's processing, that could mean it's in your mailbox right now, or it could mean you'll receive it in a few weeks from now, because the system just doesn't seem to be very accurate. I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but at this point it seems almost random as to when you'll actually receive your payment once it says processing, or even once it says it's on its way. There's been many people who have a payment status of your payment will be sent on X day, but they don't get it for 2-3 weeks after that. So it's kind of random, but generally if it says you're going to receive it, you will receive it. You just kind of have to be patient, unfortunately. So moving on to the next question. This one is regarding returning back to work. Smokey710 asks, I'm on unemployment and got a call from my employer to come back to work. Am I allowed to refuse the job due to my mom being sick with COVID and I'm taking care of her? So first off, I would like to thank Brandy Penman, who responded to this comment. and gave some advice to this person. And also thank you to anyone who helps others out in the comments. I try to answer as many as I can, but I get literally thousands a day, so it's an impossible task. That's why I like to address kind of the more important ones in the videos. So in this case, I would recommend checking into an FMLA leave because that's exactly what this is for, because you're taking care of your mom. Under normal circumstances, you could lose your unemployment, like if you weren't taking care of your mom, if your employer reported that you refused work and you're still on unemployment. So make sure you check out that program if you are taking care of your mom in this circumstance. If you're someone who just refused work, yes, you can very well lose your unemployment benefits. So that's all I have for questions for today. Finally, let's do some stock market news. The S&P 500 finished up nearly 3% from last week as the economy starts to reopen, people are traveling more, and there's more confidence in the markets. I feel like this sense of confidence is on really shaky footing. I mean, look at the data. 41 million people without jobs. That's 41 million people who aren't purchasing nearly as much as they normally would. I believe the hope is great, but for the markets to start increasing just feels a little bit premature for me. I haven't really seen that upswing yet that gives me a whole lot of confidence. Also, part of the reason why the S&P 500 seems much more healthy than it might actually be is because a few large companies, which are Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, and Facebook, make up a disproportionately large percentage of all the S&P 500 value. These 5 companies account for 17.5% of the value of the entire S&P 500, despite there being 495 more companies on the list. This is because those companies are just so much bigger than all the other ones, and tech companies are faring particularly well during this epidemic. Really, they're just getting larger by the most part. Another huge stock market winner this week was actually Lululemon, who passed their all-time stock price despite being a luxury good, and they had to close many stores for months. This one was actually quite a surprise to me, but for some reason, investors are confident that people are going to get right back out and buy some $150 leggings once this entire pandemic is over with. So that one's a little interesting to me. But that's all I have for this quick stock market update. If you want to get into the stock market, I recommend checking out Webull. That's spelled W-E-B-U-L-L. It's a super user-friendly brokerage platform where you can buy and sell stocks and index funds. You could use their stock market simulator tool if you want to just figure out how things work. You name it, you can do it on their app. If you make an account today using my link in the description, you'll receive 2 totally free stocks valued between $12 and $1,400. So far, you guys have told me about several decent winners. There were several around like $20 to $50 stocks, and one guy told me he got $150 stocks, so that's awesome, free money. The best part is if you deposit $100, you don't like their platform, after 30 days, you can get your $100 back, and you get to keep the free stocks. So that's something to think about. Until next time, I hope you guys all enjoy your weekend, and I hope you have a profitable day.